affect colonial resource-dependent economies, and so they look really good when resource prices are high, and then completely collapse when resource prices do. You can literally project when Colombia is going to be a democracy based off what the price of coffee is. This is held for 150 years.
That is fucking funny, dude. The price of coffee, man. I always buy my Starbucks coffee and stuff. I got a Warren Gammon right here, man. He's like, because everyone's so bullish on, like, one of the best places to invest right now is Medellin, Colombia, and it's a big crypto hotspot and stuff like that. But it's real lefty and not lefty, but it's a real nice place to live right now. And watch the fucking price of coffee collapses and shit, and then it goes all fucking like right wing. That'd be fucking hilarious.
When resource prices do. You can literally project when Colombia is going to be a democracy based off what the price of coffee is. This is held for 150 years. Latin America has been stuck in this trap for 300 years. Although Latin America has made some impressive gains, their percent of the world economy has remained constant over the last 100 years, and their relative wealth versus the US has remained constant for 200 years. Brazil has two separate systemic problems. The first, which I talk about in this video about Latin American civilization, is that due to its Iberian cultural heritage, there's naturally a large amount of corruption and inefficiency. And at the same time, their Latin aristocratic heritage treats working as dishonorable, while in Anglo countries, not working is considered disgusting. The second reason, and this is something that I've talked about in all sorts of previous episodes, is slavery is one of the worst things you can do in a society and is in effect a social cancer. And Brazil has practiced slavery in its history the most of almost any country in the world. And Brazil was fundamentally built upon slavery. And your average Brazilian is some mix of African ancestry, so it's difficult to remove Brazilian society from those roots. A final thing is that Brazil is one of the very unlucky countries that urbanized and thus crashed its birth rate before it could industrialize and thus become wealthy. Brazil's birth rate has crashed, and thus their economic prospects are dim for decades going forward, as they will struggle with an aging population. At the same time, their main market of Europe and the Far East are both projected to lose half their population over the next 60 plus years, meaning demand for their goods will crash. Brazil had a serious opportunity to invest in real assets and physical, actual things that would pay back their wealth in the early 2000s when they had that money, but that opportunity was completely wasted. Number 2, Russia. I really like the comparison of Russia and Brazil since they're countries that are in many ways very similar. Both are massive Western adjacent countries with some of the highest inequality rates, run by oligarchs, are corrupt and economically based off exploiting a couple resources, and are projected for dark times due to population decline. 150 years ago, you could have projected where Brazil is today, since it would be doing the exact same thing. However, Russia is a much more sad story with clear lost potential. As I talk about in this video, Russia has always been the country that has been so close to becoming a wealthy and fair place, and then makes the wrong call. Before World War I, Russia was rapidly industrializing, gaining income, and liberalizing. Russia was a massive cultural powerhouse, with a rapidly growing population, was the terror of all its neighbors. Russia was on track to become the largest economy in the world. However, the Soviets seized power. Don't get me wrong, Russia massively grew in importance under the Soviets, with them conquering all of Central Europe and fully industrializing. But to be fair, every industrial country grew massively in the early 20th century, so that's not really special. However, the Soviets, especially under Stalin, gutted every social institution by wiping out the religion, successful peasant class, private business, universities, artists, independent military, the family, and by the time Stalin died, the only thing that still worked well in the Soviet Union was the secret police. Societies are living, breathing organisms, and the things mentioned above are what allowed them to prosper. Russia, in effect, committed suicide as a society by killing all of its effective social organisms, and instead became a herd corralled by guns and brainwashed from childhood. Russia has spent centuries building up social capital under the czars, which Stalin unwisely burnt. You can see this in just the human character of Russia, going from 7 children per family in World War I to having an unsustainable birth rate in the 1970s. The average lifespan in Russia collapsed due to mass alcoholism over the last couple decades. When the Soviet Union fell, Russia was a liberal democracy for a couple years and then became a dictatorship run by the secret police, who were the only functioning organism.
Yo, this is so sad, dudes. Because if you guys actually like read on some of the Russian history and stuff, like Russia was on the way up. Like they were out here, man. And then I mean, I think it was like I think what pretty much set it off pretty badly was basically Russia losing so much to what was his name, Napoleon, and that's what really sort of kept this cascade sort of down and stuff. And then eventually getting rid of the czar, and then you had this whole communist outbreak and stuff like that, and then. Just a lot of bullshit going down, and then from there, like losing World War, in World War I and stuff. There's a huge amount of losses that happened there. Oh my god, just a lot of bad things that end up happening. But this is pretty sad because this country could have definitely done very well, and if just certain things in history didn't pan out, and went the other direction, we could have had a much different story. But dang, this country just takes a lot of L's, man.
With Putin being former secret police under the Soviets, and who has de facto run Russia for my entire life. Putin was able to stabilize Russia from the post-Soviet chaos and remains popular from this, but has also strangled the country of its possible potential. In classic Russian fashion, Putin cares more about maintaining power than the quality of life, and rules through oligarchs who purchase the old Soviet state corporations, who he uses to stabilize control of the society, which is in effect deviating back to the pre-18th century status quo, where the monarchy worked with the nobility to control the society. Russia is an incredibly unequal country where the elite live in insane luxury, while the society works for no one else. Russia has no industrial competitiveness, and its industrial base is useless, being built off the Soviets. Russia briefly looked good for the reason Brazil did, due to high resource prices in the early 2000s. In Russia's case, this was agriculture and natural gas. However, I also don't understand why people were bullish on this country. Its educated class was fleeing en masse to the West. Its elite trusts it so little that there are more Russian rubles outside Russia, sitting in bank accounts in Britain, Panama, or Cyprus than inside the nation of Russia. It lacks the preconditions for economic growth like rule of law. Like Brazil, if you looked for a second anything besides resource prices, you would see this. In fact, the Russians were very happy to become part of the BRICS because it would allow them to associate with the other countries that were experiencing economic growth, while Russia was not in the same category. There are some things where you should give the Russians credit. They were able to stabilize and keep their standard of living pretty good after the economic crash, unlike many of the other countries on this list. And the cost of living is not that high in Russia. At the same time, they've recently been able to stabilize their birth rate, but nowhere near to the degree that won't cause their end over the next few years. Again, like Brazil, Russia's economy crashed in 2014 due to resource price collapse, immediately followed by Russia's invasion of Crimea, which further hurt its economic prospects. Putin did this to unify his country during the recession, blacklisted by the rest of the world due to the first war in Crimea, and 7 years later this was completed with the invasion of Ukraine. Russia is now almost completely isolated from the world's economy, which will likely cause a crisis due to natural gas and agricultural reliance on Russia, as I talk about in this video. Russia is also in a very ugly position now with its demographics. Russia's population is slated to halve over the next 60 years. A country like this cannot survive with two 70-year-olds for every 25-year-old. Russia's staring down civil war, state collapse, and all that over the next couple decades. Number 3, India. Interestingly, of every country on this list, India has the best future ahead of it, which is probably not what anyone expected at the start of this century. However, in their classic fashion, India always plays the moderate political and economic path, steering away from the very high growth of earlier in this century, but also not facing the
Interesting. Let's see. Examples of India being an exception to the rules: not having a large bureaucracy of empires, remaining polytheistic, having multiple sort of religions, basically, keeping its tribal structure from 4,000 years ago. Okay. Never attacking its neighbors. So that's cool. Having a massive population, but basically no giant wars or atrocities. Nice. Never being conquered by the Mongols. Shout out to my boys. Never having totalitarianism. That's G. Priest class dominating the society. We'll see. The caste system, I don't know if the caste system is that great, but it just is what it is, I guess. Political motivation through religion in the 1900s. Let's see. Successfully well-run democracy. Communism. Asymmetric family structure. That's good. I would say probably number 11. That's really good. Having a good family structure. Having hunter-gatherer until today. Only break without collapsing demographics. So basically, good family structure and demography not being destroyed. Probably the 14 and 11 being the most important. Why it's still probably kicking and shit. And then not being conquered by the Mongols. That's pretty hilarious.